Hello? Hi all. Just trying to not interrupt the flow of effort, but wanted to get us to talk to each other briefly, check in that we're not duplicating each other's work, and maybe somebody in another group might have a useful comment for you. So going to get a quick report back from leads quickly from each project. I'll start. We were the community group and we discussed a bunch of different community things, and we'll probably still get to talking about governance, but for the now, I think we're doing quite useful stuff. We're taking that MIF, the minimal information model framework, and comparing it to the USGS data management plan for drones, and taking notes / editing what the MIF is already in CEDA. And the intention is we will spit out a JSON model that we can use in the API development, and maybe a little bit further down the road we can, not maybe, a little bit further down the road, then we can take that and package it in a manner that Fred, the climate scientist, and Jack, the ag scientist, or more usefully Don, the atmospheric person, and Cindy from USDA and so forth can review it. CEDA is going to have a way of publishing what you do to a web form, also by going through that process and trying to look for an ontology that I can use for each term. I might find an undergrad who can help me with this. We'll find more holes and fine. Anyway, so that's what we're doing. Hopefully by the end of today we have a better, well, we have notes and half of an integration of the USGS data plan and what the MIF has, and maybe we'll get to talking about community governance.
Okay, we have reviewed, I think, and moved on from the original OGC specification, Open API specification for obtaining coverages, to something which I think represents maybe more appropriate terminology in terms of the actual endpoint paths for how one would both push and pull data, for the drone items and collections. I think we're basically ready to, should we wish, move on to some sort of implementation. But interested to see if that's the best way that we spend the rest of the day.
I think at the very least, you want to capture this as a YAML, as an open API specification.
Yeah.
And then depending on how long, and make sure that there's this comments feature. So we definitely want to document in the comments sort of
anything we're not too sure about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of the discussion. And then the question is whether or not it makes sense, given the remaining time, to actually write some code. Or if it makes sense to talk about some of the other issues that are there. I'll keep that as a discussion with the group.
Yeah, I mean, there was also the portion of it that we had marked it as advanced or future work, which is the whole linked data portion of this.
We can start to talk a little bit about how an application LD plus JSON would utilize these endpoints and what the linked data documents would look like,
right?
And how to advertise that. And I have some ideas about how to possibly do that, but they're crazy ideas right now. Okay, so I think that's
question about that.
Go on.
I have a question before we go on. When you say API for the data, I always end up thinking about all the fields except the data. Is your API also covering all of those fields? All the fields that give descriptive metadata about the observation?
Yes, right now actually they're defined in where the top level we're assuming is mission. Okay, mission is a variable, so it could be mission 0 through to mission 0 plus n, whatever, n minus 1. But after that you have the actual coverage, and then in addition to it you have an items, and it's within that items where we nest. We had previously referred to items as features, but it's within those items where you would essentially have a collection of application specific items, which are exactly these things, John.
So would an item be a
an item would be a camera. An item would maybe even in the, a camera itself we had discussed has a center of gravity, maybe some offsets, calibration. I don't really know, but camera model, that's where all that kind of stuff would live. One of the nice distinctions here is the difference between this as a potential API for capturing this information, because a camera could come on and off of a platform and could potentially be a different mission when that happens, right? And I think this is flexible enough to capture those features of the drone missions in comparison to some other observation or something, Earth observation.
Hopefully that matches what some of the discussion we had over in the ontologizing group and stuff.
Right.
So an interesting thing to be aware of is that there's another model of all of that being created in this metadata process, and the unifying entity in that case at the moment happens to be a physical platform, a drone.
Right.
And so neither one's right nor wrong, but ideally both sides are developing in a way that it can be interchanged.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the records that are being defined on that, see, this is where I wondered what the tie-in was. And I think that potentially the records that are being defined on the Cedar side could be one of these items, right?
Okay.
I don't see there's any reason why that couldn't be the case.
Yeah.
You define the model for what?
I saw you were at a higher level, that's right.
Right.
But, good. Okay.
One thought, and on energy, but I would say technically for those that know about this, it's like pipeline code.
Yeah.
Rather use your expertise.
Yeah, I agree. I genuinely agree with that as well. The other thing as well is with this in particular, we discussed about, where's the appropriate forum to get reasonable about, feedback on this outside of the room, and it's OGC, OGC, maybe the spatial data and the web interest group, these places, but maybe more targeted communities within OGC anyway. And I think an implementation without that feedback would be slightly naive,
Yes,
Well, the implementation in a way is to accommodate some of the concepts to
yeah.
Like, why is it worth
Right.
to be?
So, the other thing for FYI, Jane, is the fact that, the use case that we brought here, the temperature reading, I think can easily be demonstrated through the example capability in the Open API specification.
Yeah.
So we should be able to facilitate that here. Yeah.
Comment on what that might be like in terms of you guys are partners helping.
Right.
Yeah.
Helping the proceeding helping. A lot of those patterns are already being placed.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, we're like,
we were counting on that.
hurry up and sell me, hurry up,
Right, man.
use it.
Actually, if you go to our background documents, the link to all the selfie stuff is there. So.
Right. So also in terms of, as you mentioned, adding in semantics like suite envo semantics to some of the fields in the API that will ultimately end up in a schema.org specification, so that we get semantic content right away and skip over this, unstructured vocabulary space. Is that also discussed there?
I brought it up, but there's a lot of things to talk about, right? So,
yeah. Of course.
But yes, so the idea is I'm going to say the word again, stubs, right? So we want to create these little information object points, right? Where we know that something exists. It's probably outside the scope of what we can do now, but we want to plug in. And so, in fact, if you look at, the SOSA feature of interest is exactly that kind of a stub, or this idea of a feature in the geo ontologies, right? And so that's the stub where then there's observable properties, and then you can bring in, links to additional types of the observable properties that then link to Envo Suite, link to meteorology ontologies, link to whatever it is that you want to. I mean, this is very general beyond the earth sciences. So that would, in my mind, is how.
And in a sense, like if we do that early, it's better in a sense like, okay, this is where we wanted to go. Because doing it later, then there's this unstructured space where you basically repeat the mistakes of the past and why it would necessitate the creation in the first place. So it doesn't have to be a profound example. Just an IRI in one of those feature of interest fields makes the point. They're doing the same thing with EML and the LTER group too, right? So.
So the use case we have right now is just a temperature, but what we could do is define a feature of interest, which is Tacoma. Right. Yeah. It's both in Sweet and in Envo. So pressure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now the question, there's a little bit of issue with the schema.org mechanism through additional type and additional property because of how those resolve out, and that's a discussion for tomorrow. So I'll make an advertisement. Tomorrow we're talking about schema.org all day, and the afternoon session is spatial and temporal aspects, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about is how we can define geoschemas, some basic types that then give you hooks into more expressive things that are linked data. All right. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we took Chuck's initial model of from the vocamp, right? And again, using the sort of let's say semantic unpacking that we do in Obo Foundry to try to keep it consistent. And also with Joe there as our drone expert to keep us on track and make sure that we're not like talking about unicorns. It ended up quite well. We got the cases through the actual drone itself, its parts, its systems, guidance systems, etc., as a model of how to add more technology onto the drone, defining what the machine should understand a payload to be. So anything not the drone that the drone is carrying or bearing becomes automatically the payload. And then using things like roles for other kinds of machines like sensors, etc., devices that can be on it, would automatically define things as sensor platforms if the sensor is being borne by it. Right. So again, the logic and the structure will help the drone AI one day, if you have it on the drone, or now some of them, understand what its parts are just by their relation to other parts. We got quite far in that. And the key there is the mission part that you had, because some of those things are not related by parthood. Like, for example, the ground station software is not part of the drone, but it is involved in the mission. So we use that mission process and mission plans, the semantics for that, to link it all together in the actualization. And that gives us the overlap of the physical movement of the drone across spatial pockets like trajectories and waypoints and paths. And then all of those things can come together on the plan level, the actualization in the process, and the overlap of spatial entities plus physical entities that move through them. And that's more or less, and we're just sketching that out into a linked graph as a sort of draft ontology.
And I think that also matches really nicely with some of the discussion that was, I know I don't have, is actually anyone online?
I don't know.
Well, just in case, if you're online, I'll make sure that you can hear me, right? So this also came up as part of the discussion over here, right? And that this sort of foundational thing is mission. In my mind, the semantics of mission here match the idea of mission there, and that it's an event, right? And there's participant roles, and that you can then use the participant roles for these objects down here, like drone 22, right? So there's items, drone 22, those have a participant role in the linked data world to the mission, right? Yep. 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 Correct. I like that. Okay.
How do you distinguish or don't distinguish between, I have a GPS that my autopilot is using, but I'm also tagging my data with it? Is that a payload or not? So the GPS is being used to control the drone, but I'm also tagging my data with it. It's also effectively a sensor.
That's fine. I mean, again, if it's, you can have a device role that is a sensor, but if it's in the original catalog of parts of the drone, it's still considered as part of the core drone body, right? It's not separate. That all that means is that the drone body would automatically be classified as a platform too, and that's okay, because that by definition it is a platform if it carries a sensor. So you just do that with roles, and it's fine. The machine understands that it's both the drone body and it's acting as a platform at that time as a sensor part.
No, that makes sense.
Is your mission one flight or a collection of flights? You use the word mission. I'm wondering how to
Collection of flights.
Yeah.
Good answer. So one of the things that will happen is there'll be a circling around of that information back to this.
Yeah.
So that's actually a fair point, right? this is, but I think that's, so this is actually a collection in general. So, I think we probably should talk about it. I think it's okay.
We're not duplicating each other, are we?
Yeah, and we are.
Doesn't matter. We're doing it in a different ways. So I think that,
Exactly. The knowledge representation is fairly different.
yeah.
The topics or objects we're talking about overlap a lot, but we're representing them in entirely different ways for different goals.
Yeah. But there's crosswalks between them. So that's the idea, is that we want to be able to get to the crosswalks for different application types, right? So we have the sort of concrete instantiation here. We have the logic instantiation that should guide this. And then we have a metadata instantiation over here, right? Which is the collection of sort of objects and terms that then would feed into this. So I think that having these different views is not, I mean, they're just different views of the same objects. So I think that that's a useful way of approaching it. Yeah, so that's the idea, is that it becomes easy to then, I mean, this is going to be published as linked data, and so it's fairly easy for that to get incorporated into this and give you options to basically say that these are the same thing, or there are some subset things, or give you the option to utilize that as a foundation for your vocabulary, right? Because my guess is that there's probably equivalent objects in them. The stickier bit over here is because this is an API. So this is an interface, right? And so this is a producer consumer of linked data documents that utilize these other bits, right? And so that's the little tricky bit about what the schema, so OpenAPI forces you to specify what the linked data document should contain in JSON schema, right? And so that's where we have to sort of make sure that those parts that you're sending and receiving at each of these points sort of match these other things that are going on, right? Okay, let me rephrase it. So here I'm talking about a JSON schema, which basically says that you have a key and a value of a particular primitive type, either string, object, or int or whatever, right? So
there's a lot of overlap in what that kind of schema presents versus
yeah.
what this schema needs
Yeah.
to present.
So OpenAPI basically uses JSON's older version of JSON schema. There was some divergence between the two, right? As its specification for what you, when you do a get or a post, what that JSON structure has to look like at that endpoint, right? And so, at least if you're using application JSON as the endpoint definition, right? And so, so that's the tricky bit, is that here it's a concrete sort of thing, because this is sending and receiving documents, right? JSON LD documents, but they're ID URIs, right, for the key values through the context, right? So if it's a linked data document, right, then that gives you the link back to what, you know, what's going on in these other two groups, right? If did that make sense to everyone? And hopefully at this point in my life, I didn't screw up that description. So, okay, all right, well, carry on. Thank you.